Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. One of the most underrated yet deeply disturbing topics in Harry Potter world is transfiguration. Officially, it's just another subject at Hogwarts where Professor McGonagall proudly turns mice into stools. But what if, behind those harmless demonstrations, hides something far more troubling? Today, I invite you to dive into the most uncomfortable and logically dangerous questions surrounding this form of magic. Enjoy the video. Number 1. What happens to consciousness during transfiguration? Imagine you're a rat. Or rather, you were a rat. Until McGonagall turned you into a goblet, the question is, where did your consciousness go? Are you still in there? Do you feel yourself being placed on a shelf, touched by hands, clinked with a spoon? Or is your mind temporarily shut off, like sleep? And when you're changed back, do you remember being a goblet? Now imagine something even worse. A person is turned into a chair. They remain aware. They feel every touch, every bump, every moment someone sits on them. And they can't scream, move, or escape. They simply exist as furniture. Forever? If consciousness is preserved, then transfiguration becomes not just powerful, it becomes one of the cruelest forms of magic, capable of driving someone insane. Number 2. Can transfiguration destroy someone's identity? Let's imagine a horrifying experiment. A person is transfigured into a stone, then into a teapot, then into a cat, then back into a person, and again, dozens, hundreds of times. Would their identity begin to unravel? Would they lose themselves in the endless carousel of forms? If consciousness is at all tied to the body, does constantly reshaping that body eventually erase the mind? Or alternatively, is the soul completely separate from the physical form in the magical world? If so, an even deeper question arises. What is consciousness made of in this universe? Where is the line between body and soul? Number 3. Where does the mass go during transfiguration? Now let's get into some basic physics. You're sitting in class and in front of you is a mouse. A wave of the wand and the mouse becomes a heavy wooden stool. What just happened? The mouse weighed maybe 300 grams, the stool about 10 kilograms. Where did the extra mass come from? Now flip it. You transfigure a large wardrobe into a teaspoon. Where did all that mass go? Did it simply vanish, compress into a denser object, or get sent to another dimension? In essence, transfiguration seems to break the laws of conservation of mass and energy, and wizards don't even bother explaining it. If wizards can manipulate matter on such a level, they wield godlike power. Yet no one uses it for industry, healing, or large-scale solutions. Why bother when you can just turn a rat into a goblet? Number 4. What happens to a person in transfigured form? Imagine a malicious spell turns you into a vase. Someone drops you. You shatter. Now the real question, what happens when the spell wears off? Do you return to your human body? And if so, what kind of body? One with broken bones, internal damage? Or do you simply die because your transfigured form was destroyed? This question becomes even more alarming when we remember that Hogwarts teaches students to transfigure animals into objects. What if a student makes a mistake? Magic is a delicate thing and perhaps not as humane as we were led to believe. Number 5. Are we sure food can't be transfigured? The magical world follows Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, and one of its core rules is that you can't create food from nothing. You can move it, multiply it, or slightly alter it, but not make it appear. But what if you take a glass and turn it into a rat? That rat has bones, meat, organs, a complete biological creature. Now what if you cook it and eat it? Isn't that technically food? So maybe food can be created just through a biological detour. Of course, this opens a flood of ethical concerns, but then again, where's the line that defines a transfiguration as incomplete? And what kind of molecular remnants of the original object remain? Number 6. Can transfiguration work partially? Imagine you're in a duel. You get an idea, turn your opponent's finger into glass. Now, they can't hold their wand. Fight over. Is that possible? Or does transfiguration only work on entire objects, the whole person, or nothing? If partial transformations are allowed, this would be the ultimate combat technique. Why kill when you can just disable? What if you turn someone's arm to stone? They're not dead, but temporarily neutralized. Why isn't this used more often? Number 7. What happens to serious injuries? Now imagine someone is critically injured. There's no hope of survival. But what if you turn them into a statue? Would bleeding stop? Would tissue damage pause? Could transfiguration become a form of magical preservation, a kind of cryogenic sleep? If so, why isn't this standard practice in magical hospitals? Or does transfiguration completely reset the body, wiping away all internal structures? In that case, what condition does the person return in? Number 8. What prevents the use of transfiguration for immortality? Dumbledore was over 150 years old, yet never once tried to make himself young again. He walked with calm dignity, his hands worn, his face lined with age. "Do not pity the dead, Harry," he said. "Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Deathly Hallows. But wouldn't it be tempting, just once, to wave a wand and erase the aches, the failing eyesight, the trembling fingers? If transfiguration can turn a hedgehog into a pincushion, why not restore a failing body to its prime? And why stop at human form? A wizard could become a phoenix, immortal, reborn from ashes, burning with power. Yet even Voldemort, obsessed with death, never chose that path. He tore his soul into pieces, brewed horrific potions, but never transfigured himself into a perfect being. Maybe there's a price. Maybe transfiguring your body breaks something deeper. Or maybe magic has rules even it won't bend, rules that say you can twist your shape, but not your fate. Number 9. Why isn't transfiguration used for everyday purposes? At the Burrow, Molly Weasley mends clothes with a flick of her wand. Stitches fly, buttons snap into place. But she never turns a worn-out jumper into a brand new one. "It's your mother's," Ron mutters, holding out a lumpy maroon sweater, Philosopher's Stone. Why didn't Molly just transfigure it into something Ron would like, or into something new altogether? If transfiguration can turn a beetle into a button, why not threadbare socks into thick woolen ones? It's as if daily magic stops just short of comfort. Harry spends most of his childhood in Dudley's hand-me-downs. Later at Hogwarts, he still wears patched robes. Not once do we see him transfigure a ripaway. Maybe it's because real transfiguration takes power. Maybe even Professor McGonagall wouldn't waste it on laundry. Or maybe transfigured items don't last. Maybe that shiny new sweater turns back to rags by bedtime. The books never explain, but it's odd. In a world where people duel with fire and vanish in a swirl of wind, no one seems interested in turning a chipped mug into a clean one. Number 10. Can Muggles use transfigured objects? Imagine Arthur Weasley, obsessed with all things Muggle, transfiguring a rock into a radio. It looks perfect. Dials, antenna, even the BBC logo. He proudly hands it to a real Muggle. But when they turn it on, nothing happens. No sound, no signal. "Fascinating," Arthur would exclaim, scratching his head. "But how does it know what station to play?" Chamber of Secrets. If transfiguration only mimics the outside, then it's just an empty shell, a fake radio made of stone. No wires, no circuits, no function. But if the radio does work, if it starts playing music and news, then we face something much stranger. Did magic invent a transmitter out of thin air? Did it summon the signal itself? That would mean magic not only bends physical rules, but also rewrites technology. If that were true, Muggles would have seen signs by now. Mysterious devices, impossible machines, but they haven't. Maybe that's why the Ministry has a whole department for Muggle-worthy excuses, because sometimes a TV does appear in a field, and it turns out to be a disguised wand, humming with spells. Number 11. What happens to the magical power of transfigured items? During the battle of the Department of Mysteries, imagine if Harry had transfigured his wand into a quill to avoid it being taken. Would it still obey him? Could he cast silently, holding it like a pen while Death Eaters searched him? The wand chooses the wizard, Ollivander had said, Sorcerer's Stone. But what if the wand no longer looks like a wand? Does its loyalty remain? If transfiguration doesn't erase the core, phoenix feather, dragon heartstring, or unicorn hair, then perhaps the magic is only sleeping, waiting. Dumbledore once said magic leaves traces and half-blood prints. So why isn't detection of disguised magical objects a common subject at Hogwarts? If a student accidentally picks up a transfigured dark object, say a cursed coin that used to be a wand, wouldn't it still hum with power? Maybe this skill is too advanced. Perhaps only the likes of Dumbledore or Mad-Eye Moody could sense it. But if so, then transfiguration becomes a perfect disguise, one that hides danger in plain sight. A magical relic masked as something ordinary might still kill, or worse, obey the wrong master. Number 12. Transfiguration and the Age of Objects. Can you create antiques? Imagine Mundungus Fletcher, ever the opportunist, finding a brand new chair in a back alley and transfiguring it into a Louis XV antique, complete with woodworm holes, hand-carved legs, and the scent of time itself. He sells it to a gullible Muggle collector for a fortune. Would the chair pass as genuinely old? Could a simple spell give it centuries of history? If transfiguration changes not just shape, but essence, then the scam becomes flawless. Mundungus, said Tonks, wrinkling her nose, you'd sell your own mother's teeth if you could find a buyer. Order of the Phoenix. Maybe he already did. Maybe they were transfigured coins. The deeper question is whether magic can rewrite time. If a wizard turns a piece of scrap iron into a gold coin, does Gringotts accept it? Or will it turn back to rust when the magic fades? In Goblet of Fire, when Barty Crouch Jr. uses a spell to transform a bone into a portkey, it functions. But for how long? Dumbledore warns that complex transfigurations are unstable. Perhaps that's the limit. Perhaps the past itself can't be forged. Not truly. The illusion may hold for days, even years, but eventually magic surrenders to truth. And the collector is left holding a chair that smells of wet paint, not history. Number 13. Where does an animagus's clothing go? When Sirius Black transforms into Padfoot, his great black dog form bursts onto the scene without a trace of his robes, no buttons flying, no fabric torn. And yet, when he changes back, fully clothed he stands, wand in hand. He was a man with long matted hair and sunken eyes, Harry observes, prisoner of Azkaban. But where were the clothes hiding? Did they compress, vanish, fold into the magic itself? The books never say. They leave it there, hanging, as if we're not supposed to ask. McGonagall provides another case. She turns from tabby to teacher right in front of students, her tartan robes never so much as wrinkled. Professor McGonagall was coming towards them, her spectacles flashing in the sunlight. The narrator notes calmly, Sorcerer's Stone. No explanation, no magical flourish, just a seamless shift. But if a human turns into a cat, and all of her mass is reduced, where does the extra weight go? A robe alone would weigh more than an entire feline body. And if she returned to human form without that mass stored somewhere, wouldn't she be bare? Even Hermione, who questions everything, never brings it up, not once, as if this piece of magic is simply too strange to touch. The wizarding world breaks the rules of physics daily, but here it does so silently. An animagus transformation seems to bend reality, hiding fabric, shrinking bodies and preserving identities, all in a breath. No wonder they require ministry registration. Perhaps the real danger isn't the transformation itself, it's what's left unspoken. Number 14. Can the soul be transfigured? When Dumbledore told Harry that Voldemort had split his soul, the boy barely grasped what it meant. By an act of evil, the supreme act of evil, the murder of another rips the soul apart, Dumbledore explained, Half-Blood Prince. But what if the soul could be reshaped not through murder but through magic? Imagine this. A wizard is transfigured into a chair during battle. The duel is intense. The chair is thrown, cracks against a stone floor, and splits in half. What happens to the person's soul? Does it shatter along with the wood, or does it hover in the air, trapped, silent, waiting to be whole again? Souls are fragile in the wizarding world. We know they can be broken, trapped, and even stored in objects, like Tom Riddle did with his diary. That book wasn't just cursed, it was alive. It was as though a little of his soul had been imprisoned inside it, said Dumbledore, Chamber of Secrets. So if a soul can be sealed inside a diary, why not inside a teacup? What if someone, intentionally or not, transfigured a person into a mundane object and left them there, not just physically but spiritually altered? A soul reshaped, a person no longer whole. This could explain the eerie presence of cursed objects. Take Marvolo Gaunt's ring, for example. Dumbledore himself was nearly killed just by slipping it on. The ring pulsed with something deeper than dark magic. Maybe it wasn't just a hex. Maybe it held the echo of a soul, distorted by transfiguration, altered by time. There was something wrong, something twisted, Harry once said of another Horcrux, Deathly Hallows. Perhaps these artifacts feel alive because part of someone truly is alive inside them, unwillingly reshaped, still conscious, still trapped. If transfiguration can alter the structure of living beings, who's to say it stops at flesh and bone? Souls might be invisible, intangible, but in the magical world, they are also manipulable. Could a dark wizard transfigure a soul into glass, into fire, into dust? What if Bellatrix Lestrange had done so to one of her victims, laughing while their essence was folded into a mirror on the wall, screaming silently forever? The books never say it's possible, but they never say it isn't. Number 15. Why isn't transfiguration used in magical duels? In the final battle at Hogwarts, when spells filled the air like a storm of fireworks, not one student, not even the professors, attempted to transfigure a Death Eater into a rock, a goblet, or a hedgehog. Instead, they relied on standard offensive and defensive magic, stunning spells, shield charms, and disarming curses. The question echoes with quiet insistence. Why did no one use transfiguration in combat? Despite being one of the most powerful and versatile branches of magic, its absence in high-stakes duels is glaring. It's not as though they lacked the knowledge. Minerva McGonagall, one of the greatest living transfiguration masters, led the defense. Yet even she, in all her might, chose to animate suits of armor rather than alter the shape of her enemies. The silence of transfiguration in war cries out louder than the booms of spellfire. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, when Dumbledore finally arrived and confronted Voldemort, his duel showcased immense magical skill. He conjured ropes, manipulated water, deflected curses with mastery, but even then the magic was elemental, combative, and direct. Transfiguration spells that could, at least in theory, transform Voldemort's wand into smoke or his robes into stone, were absent. Why? Was it because Dumbledore respected some deeper law? Or was there a practical limit to transfiguration that the textbooks didn't cover? According to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore drew himself up to his full height, and his voice rang out across the ministry. "Hit was foolish to come here tonight, Tom." His authority was absolute, yet he never reached for the transformational. He chose defense, control, and redirection. The use of transfiguration in combat would seem devastating. Imagine an aura turning a Death Eater's wand into a feather mid-duel. The enemy would be disarmed, vulnerable, and humiliated, or a powerful wizard transfiguring the ground beneath an attacker into quicksand. These possibilities are not only logically sound, but aligned with the known capabilities of magic. Transfiguration can change animate and inanimate objects as long as the witch or wizard is skilled enough and knows the rules of the transformation, yet somehow it never happens in combat. Even in the duel between McGonagall and Snape, no object becomes another. Their wands flare with shields and spells that reflect force, not essence. McGonagall herself demonstrated profound transfiguration in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when she enchanted the castle's statues and armor, commanding them to protect the school. "I always wanted to use that spell," she confessed, moments after bringing suits of armor to life. The spell was visually spectacular, tactically effective, and rooted in transfiguration. But even then she animated constructs. She didn't alter the Death Eaters. It suggests that transfiguration, while formidable, is better suited for preparation than spontaneous battle use. There is also the matter of concentration. Transfiguration is described as a delicate and complex discipline. Professor McGonagall repeatedly emphasized that accuracy and control are paramount. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, she told her first-year students, "Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts." She warned that misapplied spells could result in permanent mutilation. In a duel, where the chaos of battle clouds the mind and time is measured in split seconds, perhaps transfiguration simply takes too long. A stunning spell needs a flick and a shout. Transfiguration may demand visualization, precision, and intention that the heat of combat does not allow. And then there's the issue of reversibility. Most dueling spells, Expelliarmus, Stupefy, even Protego, are transient. They come, they act, and they vanish. Transfiguration, by contrast, alters the nature of its target. That raises ethical, magical, and legal concerns. Turning someone into a rabbit might be clever, but what if you can't turn them back? What if the spell only partially succeeds? The result could be a monstrosity, a fusion of man and hare, neither one nor the other, with a mind shattered by the attempt. The responsibility of such magic might be more than most duelists are willing to bear. The duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort in the Ministry offers further insight. Dumbledore summoned fire, conjured water, manipulated energy. His attacks were elemental and symbolic. Voldemort in turn threw dark curses and magical force, but neither used transfiguration to gain a decisive edge. Dumbledore did transfigure inanimate objects, a spell that made a statue leap to protect Harry, but he did not attempt to alter Voldemort himself. If Dumbledore, the greatest transfiguration master of his age, refrained, was it respect or fear of what such power might do? There is an unspoken moral code among duelists. Even in desperate moments, certain magic is rarely used. The Cruciatus Curse, Imperius, Avada Kedavra, these are deemed unforgivable because they cross a line. Could transfiguration, when used on humans, teeter near that line? Turning an opponent into a turtle might seem benign, but it violates their autonomy, their identity. In some sense, it mimics the cruelty of the dark arts, not in causing pain, but in overriding the human soul. Perhaps that's why transfiguration in battle is limited to objects, not people. Sirius Black, in Order of the Phoenix, duelled Bellatrix Lestrange in the Department of Mysteries. He laughed, taunted, and fought with vigor, but when he fell, it was not to transfiguration. A simple curse sent him tumbling into the Vale. The whole skirmish in the department showed a blur of traditional combat magic. No one turned a shelf into vines or changed a Death Eater's mask into iron. Even the experienced fighters, Lupin, Kingsley, Moody, stuck to bolts of magic and shouts of counterspells. There is also the problem of permanence. Transfiguration can be temporary or permanent, depending on the skill and intention of the caster. But controlling permanence under pressure is risky. A temporary transformation might wear off at the worst moment. A permanent one might require ministry intervention or specialized reversal. Battlefields are not places for uncertain effects. A poorly timed transfiguration might backfire, returning a transformed enemy to their original state behind your lines. Number 16. How long does a transfiguration last? In the quiet corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and staircases move of their own accord, there exists a kind of magic that is both wondrous and terrifying: transfiguration. A discipline so precise, so demanding, that Professor McGonagall herself warns students that transfiguration is some of the most complex magic they will ever learn. And indeed, in the pages of J.K. Rowling's books, transfiguration seems to work seamlessly. Quills become needles, teacups turn into tortoises, but rarely does the story pause to ask the chilling question: how long do these transformations actually last? Take, for example, the moment in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire when Draco Malfoy attempts to hex Harry from behind, only to be hit by a spell from Mad-Eye Moody, who transforms Draco into a bouncing white ferret. Professor McGonagall came hurrying down the corridor. Rowling writes, her spectacles flashing. "Moody, is that a student?" And while McGonagall is outraged at the use of such transformation as punishment, what's more intriguing is that no mention is made of how the transformation is reversed. Did Moody actively reverse the spell? Or did it wear off naturally? The text is silent. This silence is where the danger lies. Magic, especially transfiguration, seems to operate under rules more ancient than those printed in textbooks. When Hermione Granger, ever the meticulous student, transforms a matchstick into a needle, she does it with elegance. Professor McGonagall nods approvingly. But did the matchstick truly become a needle, or only appear to be one for a while? If someone had tried to sew with it weeks later, would it have held? Would it have reverted to wood mid-stitch, splintering a finger? There is also the question of objects given as gifts. Say a young wizard, eager to impress a beloved, transforms a lump of coal into a diamond ring. The magic is clean, the illusion perfect. For a time, the recipient wears the ring proudly, unaware of its mundane origins. But transfiguration, as we are told, is based on concentration, magical strength, and intent. What happens when that intent is forgotten, or the magic weakens with time? One morning, could the gemstone crumble into black soot, staining fingers and revealing a heartbreaking truth? Gilderoy Lockhart, that most flamboyant of professors, attempted transfiguration on several occasions, often with disastrous results. In Chamber of Secrets, he tries to mend Harry's broken arm, but instead vanishes the bones entirely. Though not strictly transfiguration, it speaks to the chaos that follows when magic goes awry. If transformation fails mid-process, the result is not just embarrassing, it can be lethal. Consider then a scenario in which a wizard transforms a snake into a walking stick for camouflage. Hours later, the creature might revert in the middle of a crowded room, fangs bared, venom ready. The illusion not only fails, it retaliates. There are deeper implications in the case of Peter Pettigrew. His animagus form, a rat, is self-controlled, not forced by another. He lived undetected for 12 years in the Weasley household. But suppose he had been transfigured into a rat by someone else, say Dumbledore himself, as punishment. Would the magic have held for 12 years? Doubtful. Animagi are bound by magical contracts, not temporary spells. Transfiguration, by contrast, relies on continued magical structure, like a tent propped up by unseen poles. Remove the support and the canvas collapses. In Harry Potter and The Philosopher's Stone, McGonagall famously turns her desk into a pig and back again. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she warns. The message is clear, this is not to be trifled with. But even she does not address duration. If she had walked out of the room and forgotten the spell, would the pig have remained indefinitely? Or would the desk reappear hours later, unsettling the students? The danger becomes more pronounced when transfiguration is used in combat. In Order of the Phoenix, during the battle at the Department of Mysteries, Tonks transforms something off-screen, an object or a person we don't know, and we're reminded that transfiguration can be a weapon. But what if a transfigured item, say a wall conjured from cloth, suddenly reverts mid-fight? What if the shield one holds, seemingly made of steel, becomes soft wool again in the middle of a curse? The implications are not just about aesthetics, but survival. And yet there is no mention in the curriculum of a spell's expiration, no glowing timer above a transfigured object, no color shift to suggest weakening magic. Wizards operate blindly. They create transformations and trust in their permanence, or at least in their usefulness within the moment. But time is a cruel enemy. Magic, like memory, fades, and when it does, the world can shift beneath your feet. There are whispers, of course, of permanent transfiguration. The story of Emmerich Switch, author of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, is full of quiet implications. He supposedly mastered the art of turning items permanently, but the ministry never confirmed it. Perhaps they feared the ethical consequences. If transfiguration can be made permanent, then why bother crafting or mining or harvesting? One could create food, diamonds, even weapons, from thin air, so long as one had the magical stamina. And yet we know that food cannot be created from nothing, per Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. The law implies limits, moral, magical, or both. Fred and George Weasley, those masters of magical mischief, experimented with transfiguration in their joke shop. Skiving snack boxes and canary creams hint at bodily transformations, albeit temporary. One eats the candy, transforms, and later returns to normal. But what if the transformation were involuntary? What if a poorly cast spell failed to reverse? In one letter to Ron, their tester, is said to have remained bright yellow for 2 days. "We're still working out the kinks," Fred wrote. Such casual transfigurations, while humorous, highlight the fragility of magical balance. Number 17. What happens if you transfigure a magical artifact? Of all the magical branches taught at Hogwarts, transfiguration is perhaps the most precise, the most demanding, and, some would argue, the most dangerous. It asks witches and wizards not merely to wield magic, but to command its essence, to rewrite the fabric of reality itself. The question then arises, what happens when transfiguration meets an object already steeped in ancient and potent enchantments? What if someone attempted to transform a Horcrux, a cursed vessel housing a fragment of a human soul, into something else entirely? Would the magic bend? Would it break? Or would it rebel in ways too dark to fathom? To explore this unsettling possibility, let us revisit the most infamous Horcruxes created by Lord Voldemort. Among them, the Slytherin locket stands out, not merely because of its haunting influence over those who bore it, but because of the questions it leaves in its wake. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the locket whispers, mocks, and manipulates, feeding on the wearer's insecurities and magnifying their darkest thoughts. "I am a liar," it hisses to Ron. "I am a thief. I am a coward." The locket never ceased its influence, not even when hidden in the forest or carried deep inside Hermione's enchanted bag. It existed as more than a trinket. It was alive in its malevolence. Now consider a hypothetical but plausible situation. What if someone, perhaps a well-meaning wizard trying to hide the Horcrux from its creator, chose to transfigure the locket into a smooth, ordinary pebble? Such a choice would be cunning, deceptively simple. A pebble thrown into the sea would vanish among billions. But transfiguration is not mere illusion. It doesn't conceal, it changes. So would this transformation truly mask the soul within, or would it trigger unintended consequences? Transfiguration involves a complete alteration of the object's physical structure, shape, and often its material composition. Professor McGonagall once warned her class that the spell must be performed with utmost precision. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. It's dangerous not only because of what it does, but because of what it might unravel. When one applies such a transformation to a mundane object, the risks are manageable, but a magical object is not mundane. Its very identity is fused with enchantments, hexes, and in the case of a Horcrux, soul-bound magic. The soul fragment within the Horcrux is not passive. It resists destruction. When Harry stabs the diary with a basilisk fang, ink gushes like the blood, and the screaming visage of young Tom Riddle is banished in torment. This is not the reaction of an object being destroyed, it is the death throes of something alive. So what happens when a transfiguration spell forces this semi-sentient object into a new form? Does the soul fragment suffer a kind of metaphysical trauma, or worse, does it retaliate? The nature of enchantments must also be considered. A magical object like the Marauder's Map, for instance, contains layers of charm work so sophisticated that even accomplished witches like Umbridge couldn't decipher them. If such an object were transfigured into parchment, would it lose its magic? Probably not. The magic would likely hide, lie dormant, or become corrupted. The key distinction lies in intent and identity. When an object is charmed, its original structure remains intact. Transfiguration, on the other hand, rewrites that structure. It overwrites reality. There is no known case in the books where a Horcrux, or any magical object of similar magnitude, has been successfully transfigured, and perhaps this absence is itself telling. Wizards as brilliant as Dumbledore, Slughorn, and even Voldemort himself never sought to disguise Horcruxes through transfiguration. Instead, they used concealment, misdirection, or enchanted protection. The locket was hidden in a cave, surrounded by enchantments, but never altered in form. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff remained in its original state, buried deep within Bellatrix Lestrange's vault. The diary, too, masqueraded as a diary, not a stone or a shoe or a spoon. One must ask why. The answer might lie in magical instability. If transfiguration attempts to impose a new identity on an object whose magic is intrinsically linked to its form, the result might be magical turbulence. Think of it as pouring acid onto an active potion. Something will fizz, boil, or explode. The soul fragment, unwilling to accept a new vessel, might rupture or surge outward, infesting the caster or corrupting the surrounding area. In a worst-case scenario, the magical backlash could be deadly. At the very least, it could cause irreversible damage to the spellcaster's wand or core. Let us imagine a desperate witch during the First Wizarding War who comes into possession of the diadem of Ravenclaw, unaware of its true nature. Suppose she feels its dark aura and chooses to transfigure it into a lump of coal to be thrown into a Muggle furnace. The spell succeeds, or so it seems. The coal sits innocently in her palm, but within hours she begins to feel feverish, hears whispers in the corners of the room. She dreams of burning forests and laughing children with serpent eyes. By dawn, she's vanished without a trace. The coal remains untouched in the hearth, smouldering without fuel. A chilling hypothetical, but not an unlikely one. It is important to remember that magic in the Harry Potter universe behaves with intention. Wands choose their wizards. The room of requirement gives only what one truly needs. The Elder Wand changes allegiance only through conquest. In such a world, magic does not blindly follow commands. It listens, it interprets, and sometimes it rebels. A transfigured Horcrux may appear changed, but its essence, its soul, remains vigilant. The disguise is only skin deep. Magic knows what it is and refuses to forget. Number 18. Can transfiguration change the age of a living being? Of all the questions that arise when studying the vast world of transfiguration, none is as unsettling or provocative as this. Can transfiguration change a person's age? Not just appearance, not just temporary illusions, but actual age. If Professor McGonagall can turn a desk into a pig and back again, if a beetle can become a button, then why couldn't an adult be transfigured into a child, or a child into an old man? The question is as unnerving as it is fascinating, for it reaches into the very heart of what it means to grow, to age, and to live. Transfiguration, according to A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch, is the art of changing the form and appearance of an object. This definition is repeated across the Hogwarts curriculum, always with the caution that such transformations are limited by the natural essence of the target. But essence is a nebulous word. A person's body ages, so does a tree, a dog, or even a phoenix. If the form can be altered, can the timeline be as well? Is age merely physical, or is it entangled with the intangible, consciousness, memory, soul? When Hermione Granger transformed herself into Bellatrix Lestrange using Polyjuice Potion in Deathly Hallows, the effect was impressive. But Polyjuice affects only external appearance. The voice needed to be practiced, the mannerisms mimicked. She was still Hermione underneath, but what if a transfiguration spell could take it further, could reshape muscle mass, bone density, even brain development? Could an 8-year-old become a 30-year-old not just in shape, but in capability? This idea is made more curious by the events of the Goblet of Fire, when Barty Crouch Jr., under the guise of Mad-Eye Moody, demonstrated transfiguration of a living being into another living being, specifically turning Draco Malfoy into a ferret, not merely changing clothes or hair, but restructuring the entire organism. As Moody slammed the ferret Draco into the ground, the implication was clear: the transformation was total. If such a change is possible, then aging, which is only a biological process, should be easy by comparison. Yet nowhere in the series do we see a character use transfiguration to become younger or older. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore and Harry visit the orphanage, we are told of Tom Riddle's ability to manipulate others and objects, but not once is there mention of anyone using magic to skip the natural progression of age. And why not? In a world where time-turners exist, it seems suspicious that age remains sacrosanct, untouched by even the boldest spells. Consider the curious case of Bathilda Bagshot in Deathly Hallows. When Harry and Hermione meet her in Godric's Hollow, she is ancient, her body decaying, and yet still moving. But of course she is dead, her body merely a puppet for Nagini. Still, the fact that an old body can be used, controlled, and even somewhat preserved opens an unsettling thought. Could a wizard theoretically take a young person and, through transfiguration, shape their body into an old one, bones brittle, skin wrinkled, heart fragile, and in doing so, bring forward the consequences of age? But even if this is possible, does it mean the soul ages too? Or is the body simply a costume? Take, for instance, the possibility of transforming an 11-year-old first-year student into a full-grown adult. The muscles would need to stretch, the brain to mature, the hormones to balance. And what of memories? Would that child suddenly understand the world as an adult does, or would they remain mentally 11, now encased in an overwhelming adult frame? The question gains more weight when we examine Dumbledore's own words in The Philosopher's Stone. To the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. Death, not age, he says, as if age is inevitable, but death is a choice, and perhaps it is in the wizarding world. But then again, why did Dumbledore himself not choose to make himself younger, more robust, as the cursed ring began its slow execution? Could he not have transfigured his failing hand into a younger one? Or was the magic simply too dangerous, too unstable, or perhaps even too sacred? It is worth looking at the Animagus transformation. Sirius Black turning into a dog is still Sirius. He retains thought, purpose, identity. His body, however, is reshaped entirely. So is Professor McGonagall's, whose tabby cat form is so detailed that even the spectacle markings around the eyes remain. The body is malleable, clearly, but when they return to their human forms, they are the same age they were before. There is no lingering physical impact, which raises a deeper fear. Perhaps transfiguration is illusion made flesh, and nothing more. If a child were transfigured into an adult, one must ask, would they gain the internal organs of an adult, the lung capacity, the reproductive systems, the muscle structure? Would their brain structure change? If not, then they would be a child wearing an adult's skin. If so, then we venture into even darker territory, the ethical chaos of forced aging. Imagine Voldemort had he discovered a method to age his Death Eaters into warriors within weeks. Imagine the Ministry churning out bureaucrats by fast-forwarding orphans into adulthood. What of the psychological trauma, the loss of a childhood stolen by magic? There is also the disturbing possibility of regression. Could someone transfigure an elder into a toddler, frail mind, helpless body, and render them permanently dependent? Even erase memory through physical reshaping of the brain? If so, then transfiguration becomes a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. To reduce a person not to ash, but to infancy, not by time, but by force. In the Department of Mysteries, the time room holds clocks, time-turners, and most notably, a bell jar containing a hummingbird that hatches, grows, ages, dies, and is reborn in a loop. This is one of the rare examples in the series that show age being manipulated visibly and repeatedly. The transformation is real, not illusion. It suggests that aging can be cycled, but within a magical container, controlled and limited. Is this what wizards fear? That if allowed to alter age freely, the balance of time would be destroyed. Age, after all, is more than just a number. It is the sum of wear on the body, the burden of memory, the layering of experience. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore stands before Harry in the Ministry, facing down Voldemort, he moves with the power of a man who has lived over a century. His magic is not just strength, it is wisdom. If age could be bypassed, would we lose the very core of growth? Still, the temptation is there. During the Triwizard Tournament, Harry is forcibly matured, not physically but emotionally. He learns grief, burden, responsibility. What if, instead of facing trials, he had been transfigured into an adult? Would he have understood Cedric's death better, or merely reacted with the same boyish panic in an older body? Would his magic have been more powerful, or does power come only through lived time? The question loops back to Hermione once more. The girl who mastered spells far beyond her years. She used a time-turner to take extra classes, creating more hours in the day, but even then she aged normally. The Ministry forbade its use beyond a few hours for a reason. The danger of unraveling time is not theoretical, it is proven. Might transfiguration that alters age be equally forbidden? The Mirror of Erased, which shows the deepest desires of the heart, displays Harry's family and Dumbledore's own vision, his sister, alive, whole, his regrets undone. Neither sees themselves young. Perhaps they understand what age gives us. Perhaps youth, when stripped of its journey, becomes meaningless. To be a child again without innocence is a cruel joke. There is a final clue in the tale of Nicolas Flamel. The famed alchemist lived over 6 centuries, his age extended through the Philosopher's Stone, and when the stone was destroyed, he chose death, accepting the natural order. But what if a form of transfiguration had offered him youth, not just life? Would he have taken it? Or does youth, artificially returned, feel hollow? Magic bends rules, it breaks the laws of physics, ignores the boundaries of biology. But time it respects, always. When Dumbledore tells Harry in The Half-Blood Prince, it is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, he acknowledges the one barrier no spell dares to cross. Perhaps it is not because they cannot, but because they must not. And so we return to the question, could transfiguration change age? In theory, yes, a clever enough witch might replicate the body of a younger self, but would it be real or merely an echo? Could the soul keep up, or would it be lost in the process? Perhaps in the deepest vaults of the Department of Mysteries, an answer lies. But until then, age remains the one transformation that even wizards choose to endure, not escape. Number 19. What happens when magical creatures are transfigured? In the spring term of her third year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger once attempted a particularly complex transfiguration exercise during Professor McGonagall's advanced workshop. It was meant to transform a teapot into a tortoise, and while her spell succeeded, the resulting tortoise shivered occasionally and emitted steam from its nostrils. McGonagall, though impressed, was not pleased. "This is why we tread lightly when it comes to living objects," she had said, her lips tight. Yet few dared ask, what if that tortoise had been magical in nature? What if, say, a bowtruckle or even a hippogriff had been the subject? The unspoken truth within Hogwarts' Transfiguration curriculum is that there are lines which even the most capable students are not allowed to cross. One of those lines involves the transfiguration of magical beings, beasts whose very essence is interwoven with magic itself. The rules are clear. Magical creatures are not to be used for transfiguration practice. This is not merely a matter of ethics, it is a matter of containment, of understanding, and of catastrophic potential. Magical creatures differ from mundane animals not just in their behaviors or appearance, but in the way they interact with magic. They are not passive recipients of spells. They are participants in the magical ecosystem, sometimes even channels of ancient power. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures categorizes such beings not only by their danger level, but by the complexity of the magic they embody. A unicorn, for instance, is said to possess a form of incorruptible magic. Its blood, as Ferenczi explains in Philosopher's Stone, grants cursed life. How then can such a creature be altered, reshaped, or destroyed without unleashing unintended consequences? A hippogriff, half eagle and half horse, stands as one of the clearest examples. Buckbeak, Hagrid's proud companion, was more than just an intelligent beast. He responded to honor, understood protocol, and carried a magic that was visible in the very weight of his wings. One cannot imagine pointing a wand at such a creature and muttering "Vera Verto" with any expectation of success. At best, the spell would fizzle. At worst, it could rebound. Magic aimed at magic is not arithmetic, it is alchemy. The result is never additive, it is transformative, unpredictable. Fan theorists often speak of a magical core, an invisible center of power that resides within all magical beings, be they witches, dragons, or thestrals. This core, they argue, is what gives rise to wandless magic in certain creatures, or the passive effects they exert on the world. Nifflers are attracted to treasure not by training but by magical instinct. Boggarts react to fear, sensing it through magical means. Interfering with such a core by forcing transfiguration upon it would be akin to ripping out the internal framework of a spell mid-casting. The reaction could be explosive. There are whispered records buried in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library about such accidents. In one account, a sixth-year student from Durmstrang tried to transfigure a fire crab into a suitcase for easy smuggling. The suitcase worked for 10 seconds, then it erupted into blue flames, immolating his dormitory and 3 walls of the East Tower. The crab survived. The tower did not. What the student failed to account for was the fire crab's natural magical defense system, which interpreted the transformation as an attack. The Ministry of Magic has long enforced laws prohibiting the transfiguration of magical beings without explicit authorization. These laws are rooted not in moral righteousness, but in fear, learned from centuries of magical experimentation gone wrong. Even professional magizoologists refrain from such attempts. Newt Scamander, the preeminent authority on magical creatures, wrote in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, "To alter the form of a magical creature is not merely to alter its body, but to provoke the magic within it, often with volatile results." But let us return to the hypothetical. A wizard decides to transfigure a hippogriff into a sofa. What happens to the consciousness of the creature? Does it vanish, remain trapped, silenced beneath the upholstery? If the hippogriff possesses a magical awareness, then it is not a question of whether this act is possible. It is a question of whether it is ethical. Imagine a sentient mind, aware of honor, trapped in cushions and unable to move. Is it still alive? Is it still magic? Transfiguration is, in its most dangerous form, a battle of wills. When Professor McGonagall transformed her desk into a pig and back again during a lesson in Chamber of Secrets, the class applauded. But it was a desk. It had no resistance, no soul. A magical creature, however, might fight back, not with claws or talons, but with its very essence. There are anecdotes of wizards who attempted to transfigure sphinxes and suffered memory loss, confusion, even bursts of unexplainable emotion. Magic twisted not only physically, but psychically. Magical creatures are, by some interpretations, part of the magical environment in the same way ley lines are part of geography. To transfigure one might be to disrupt an entire region's magical stability. This is especially true for highly magical ecosystems like the Forbidden Forest. Rumors persist that in the early 1700s an experiment involving the transfiguration of a centaur resulted in a blight that killed every unicorn foal born in the area for 5 years. The centaur, it is said, lived, but his body was covered in shifting scars that never faded. The philosophy behind transfiguration assumes a plasticity of form, that objects and beings can be molded like clay, but magic is not clay. Magic remembers, it resists, it fights back when twisted beyond recognition. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore warns that even non-magical objects, like the Horcrux ring, can be cursed in such a way that simple spells become dangerous. If inanimate things can resist alteration, what then of creatures that breathe, that think, that dream? Consider also the possibility that transformation does not entirely remove what came before. If a magical being is transfigured into a mundane object, does the object retain traces of magic? Does it hum, glow, repel? Some believe that the Malfoy family's cursed mirror, a relic that once reflected only the darkest version of the viewer, was the result of a botched transfiguration of a banshee. The banshee, trapped, still screamed in silence within the mirror. The object was eventually buried beneath the floorboards of Malfoy Manor after Narcissa complained of waking dreams filled with wailing. In the practical world of spells, the more complex the subject, the more complex the consequences. The simple act of transfiguring a beetle into a button might go unnoticed, but try it with a Grindylow and you invite layers of unpredictable outcomes. Magical creatures operate on different rules. They have survival mechanisms not entirely based in biology. A transformed boggart, for instance, would still shape-shift according to fear, even if its form was changed. What then is the purpose of transfiguration if it cannot overwrite essence? Essence is the key word. Transfiguration alters surface, structure, behavior. But it does not annihilate soul. It cannot fully overwrite magic. When McGonagall teaches students the theory of partial transfiguration, she emphasizes the importance of maintaining magical focus. But how can focus overcome resistance that comes from within the subject? One theory suggests that truly successful transfiguration of magical beings might require consent, something no spellbook dares to admit. Wizards who experimented with animagi transformations often report residual effects. Sirius Black, even in human form, retained heightened senses, a certain aggression. Peter Pettigrew's cowardice only deepened in his rat-like years. If humans transforming themselves into animals undergo psychological consequences, imagine the trauma inflicted upon a beast transformed against its will. Would it emerge sane, whole? It is perhaps no coincidence that transfiguration is the most dangerous of the core magical subjects. Defense against the dark arts might battle evil, but transfiguration dares reshape life. The scars of those who pushed the limits linger. In the footnotes of an unpublished manuscript by Bathilda Bagshot, it is written that a wizard once attempted to transfigure a Kelpie into a bridge. The Kelpie complied briefly. Then the bridge collapsed, dragging 7 travellers into the loch. The wizard vanished. Only his hat was recovered. Hippogriffs, dragons, phoenixes, these are not beasts of instinct alone. They carry myth, magic, memory. To reduce them to furniture or weapons through transfiguration is not merely an act of disrespect. It is an act of war against their very identity. Their cause resist, recoil, and retaliate. Perhaps this is why even Voldemort never sought to transfigure magical creatures. He could kill, he could dominate, but he could not twist what refused to bend. Some scholars argue that magical creatures embody ancient spells given flesh. Dragons breathe fire not as a natural function, but as a magical phenomenon. Thestrals are invisible to most not because of biology, but because of magical conditions surrounding death and perception. These creatures are living paradoxes, walking enchantments. Attempting to reshape them by brute magical force may well be the equivalent of rewriting runes with broken ink. In the end, the wizard who tries to turn a hippogriff into a sofa might succeed for a heartbeat. But even in that moment, the sofa might glare, it might snort, it might disappear in a cloud of feathers and fury, leaving behind nothing but shredded upholstery and scorched floorboards, and somewhere in the distance the wind might carry a warning. Magic defies simplification, and living magic defies control. Number 20. Can memories be transfigured? In the heart of the wizarding world, magic breathes through the very essence of thought, memory, and identity. Memories are not just fleeting images or whispers of the past. In the universe J.K. Rowling built, they can be siphoned from the mind, swirled into silvery strands, and dropped into a pensive like drops of liquid consciousness. Once inside, one can walk through them, see through the eyes of another, witness events long gone as if they were unfolding again. Magic, in this form, grants memory a tangible existence. And yet, a question lingers in the shadows of Hogwarts' long corridors and the forbidden wings of magical libraries. If memories are so nearly material, why haven't witches and wizards learned to transfigure them? This question isn't just theoretical. It touches the darkest corners of magical ethics and the fragility of truth itself. If a memory can be seen and revisited, could it not be altered too? Could transfiguration, typically used to turn hedgehogs into pincushions or teacups into turtles, reach into the mind and change the very nature of a memory? Could it reshape a birthday party into a funeral, a joyful dance into a night of horror? Such questions are uncomfortable precisely because they unravel the fabric of trust upon which the wizarding world is built. What if the past isn't just gone, but edited? Consider the pensieve of Albus Dumbledore. We see it used in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, where Dumbledore pulls memories from his own mind and from others to reveal fragments of Tom Riddle's past. But one memory stands out for what it lacks. When Dumbledore first retrieves Horace Slughorn's recollection of Riddle asking about Horcruxes, the scene is distorted. It is clouded, incomplete, clearly tampered with. This is not simply a matter of recollection being fuzzy. Slughorn has altered his memory. This is perhaps our first undeniable clue that memories in the wizarding world are not sacred. They can be rewritten. But how did Slughorn do it? The books do not say. He is not a master of the mind like Severus Snape, nor a practiced legilimens. So could this be a form of transfiguration, not of the physical world, but of magical matter that resides within the self? Transfiguration, as taught at Hogwarts, is described as a branch of magic that alters the form and appearance of an object. But when that object is a memory, what rules apply? Can the same incantations be adjusted to manipulate mental constructs? Or is there a darker, unnamed branch of transfiguration that deals with the soul? The Department of Mysteries hints at this possibility. Behind one of its many locked doors lies a room where thoughts are studied, where brain-like creatures swim in tanks, where the mysteries of the mind are explored beyond the boundaries of morality. It is within these chambers that the theoretical becomes practical. If memory is matter, and clearly it is when pulled from the head and examined, then the laws of magical physics apply. And if so, transfiguration might be more dangerous than any spell Voldemort ever cast. Let's go deeper. Consider Gilderoy Lockhart. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, he admits proudly and horrifyingly that he's stolen the accomplishments of others, wiping their memories clean after extracting their stories. He uses Obliviate, a charm meant to erase memories, but this too is a form of memory manipulation. It is the blunt instrument to Transfiguration's scalpel. Obliviate destroys, but what if one sought not to erase but to reshape? To take a humiliating memory and make oneself the hero? To turn guilt into innocence? Such precision work would demand magic more elegant than a charm. It would demand structure, discipline, transfiguration. If so, then transfiguration becomes the most terrifying weapon in the magical arsenal. Not a spell to transform rabbits into slippers, but one to rewire the mind, to restructure identity. The implications are enormous. Think of Barty Crouch Jr., who in Goblet of Fire impersonates Mad-Eye Moody using Polyjuice Potion. He not only steals a man's identity, he mimics his mannerisms, his knowledge, his power. But what if such impersonation went deeper, not into the body, but into the memory? What if Barty Crouch Jr. could have planted false memories into the heads of those around him? Would we ever have known the truth? The Imperious Curse shows us that minds can be controlled. Legilimency shows us they can be read. Occlumency guards them. But transfiguration, it's the missing piece in the magical puzzle. What if it could change memories themselves, bend them into new shapes like glass blown in a fire? What if it could take a moment of trauma and twist it into joy, or twist joy into trauma for the sake of manipulation? This brings us to a chilling speculation. What if Tom Riddle knew this magic? In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry that Riddle was fascinated by memory, by identity, by what makes a person who they are. He learned from the ghosts of the past, Hepzibah Smith, Morfin Gaunt, even Slughorn, but in each case, memories were missing or altered. Morfin Gaunt, in particular, is left with a fake recollection of murdering the Riddle family, memories planted by Voldemort. Dumbledore states he modified Morfin's memory and made it appear that Morfin had committed the murders. What kind of magic does this? This isn't Obliviate, this is something else. Voldemort likely did not use a simple memory charm. He replaced one reality with another. That is not erasure. That is creation. That is transfiguration of the mind. And yet the word is never used. Could it be because such a form of magic is so forbidden that it is never taught, never discussed, even in whispers? Could it be one of the many dark arts buried beneath the surface of magical education, feared not for its complexity, but for its consequences? If one can transfigure a memory, one can also falsify evidence. Imagine a trial at the Wizengamot. Veritaserum is powerful, but even it relies on the subject's perception of truth. If that truth has been tampered with, if the subject remembers committing a crime they did not commit, justice becomes impossible, the system collapses. Dumbledore trusted memories enough to base life and death decisions on them. But what if they are no longer trustworthy? What if they are forged? Let us also consider Snape. In Deathly Hallows, we see his memories poured into the pensive as he dies, revealing the truth of his love for Lily Potter. These memories become the foundation of Harry's understanding of the man, but how do we know they are unaltered? Can we ever be sure? Snape was a master of occlumency. Could he also have learned the deeper secrets of transfiguration, not to lie with words, but with memories? What if his final act was not a confession, but a carefully curated narrative? This is not just paranoia. It is a question of magical logic. If something can be viewed, it can be edited. If it can be edited, it can be weaponized. The very trust we place in the pensive becomes its greatest weakness. For who watches the memory maker? Who ensures that what we see is what truly happened? The ethical dilemma grows darker when applied to healing. Imagine a healer who uses transfiguration to remove traumatic memories from a patient's mind. A noble act, perhaps. But what is lost? Could the same healer not reshape a soldier's past to make them more docile? Could grief be transfigured into gratitude? Could rebellion be rewritten as loyalty? When memory becomes malleable, freedom becomes fragile. In the Order of the Phoenix, we watch Harry suffer as visions from Voldemort's mind invade his own. But what if Harry's memories were targeted too? What if the Department of Mysteries or even the Ministry of Magic sought to reshape what he had seen? After all, Cornelius Fudge denied Voldemort's return, not because he lacked proof, but because he feared the truth. What if memory manipulation through transfiguration became the government's tool of censorship? Even the Mirror of Earist reveals something important. It shows not what is, but what is desired. What if memory could be transfigured to match desire? What if a grieving parent could be made to remember their child as having survived? Would they be happier, or merely lost in a lie? When the boundaries between fact and fiction blur, reality becomes a suggestion. Some might argue that such magic would never be taught at Hogwarts, but think of the Room of Requirement, think of the Chamber of Secrets, think of the hidden spells in the Half-Blood Prince's Potions book. Hogwarts is not just a school, it is a castle of secrets layered with forgotten knowledge. What if, in its oldest corridors, there exists a textbook on the transfiguration of memory? What if such a spell was deemed too powerful to teach, too dangerous to destroy? And what of the wand? Transfiguration relies heavily on the caster's intent and skill. Could a particularly powerful wizard, say Grindelwald or Dumbledore himself, learn to direct their wand not at a table or a goblet, but at the folds of memory itself? Could they recast the past with a flick of the wrist, a whisper of Latin, a twist of will? Ultimately, the transfiguration of memory is not just an academic speculation, it is a philosophical abyss. If we accept that magic can alter perception and that perception is reality, then reality itself becomes unstable. Truth becomes a variable. History becomes a story told by the most skilled spellcaster. In a world where memories can be extracted like ink from a well, who controls the narrative? Perhaps that is why Dumbledore feared power so deeply. Not because it corrupts absolutely, but because in the wrong hands it can rewrite the world itself. Number 21. Can transfiguration break the laws of time? Of all the subjects taught at Hogwarts, transfiguration holds a strange duality: precise and unpredictable, practical and philosophical, elegant and dangerous. Yet buried beneath its surface lies a question so quietly uncomfortable that it rarely enters conversation. Can transfiguration bend time itself? Consider this: when a rusted goblet, aged and pitted by centuries, is turned into a sparkling silver chalice, isn't that more than just changing shape? Isn't it reversing entropy? If we accept that time leaves its mark on all things, then transforming the old into the new raises more than eyebrows. It challenges the very arrow of time. Minerva McGonagall, one of the most gifted transfiguration experts in magical history, was always careful when demonstrating spells to her students. When she turned a desk into a pig and back again, the wood was still polished, the corners still dented from years of use. The pig had never oinked with youthful energy, it had simply been the desk in another form. But what if she had changed the desk into a brand new chair, untouched by time? Would that chair remain pristine forever? And more importantly, where did the age of the desk go? Was it discarded like a worn cloak, or merely hidden beneath the illusion of newness? There is something quietly terrifying about the spell reparo, often mistaken for a cousin of transfiguration. When Hermione mended Harry's glasses on the Hogwarts Express, she didn't simply patch them up. She made them whole, new, as if they'd never been broken. Could this be interpreted as a minor undoing of time? If a vase smashed 100 years ago is mended and looks untouched, what has become of those 100 years of decay? Surely that is not a simple spell of repair, but a silent denial of the object's lived experience. The Wizengamot once heard a curious case in 1875. A wizard named Elphias Bramble was accused of counterfeiting galleons by transfiguring common brass buttons into convincing new coins. Not merely identical in form, they shimmered as if freshly minted. The goblins at Gringotts were enraged. These coins defied their enchantments not because they were fake, but because they were temporally inconsistent. They bore nowhere, no spell traces of circulation. They had no past, and that, the goblins claimed, was a breach of magical natural law. If transfiguration can erase wear, smooth cracks, polish metal, and present the illusion of youth, does it deceive time or truly reset it? In Professor McGonagall's words, transfiguration is not some whimsical parlour trick. It obeys rules older than the school itself. Yet rules bend under pressure, and time, as Hermione once bitterly observed, is a treacherous thing. Time can be travelled with a time-turner, but only with strict ministry regulation. Why then can time be manipulated through spells without oversight? The case of the Arkwright Bridge in Wales remains one of the most disturbing incidents in the Ministry's archive. In 1933, a wizard named Connell Twist attempted to rebuild a decaying stone bridge using transfiguration. Overnight, he turned moss-covered stones into what appeared to be gleaming new granite blocks. The structure stood tall for exactly 2 weeks. Then, during a thunderstorm, the bridge collapsed, killing 3 Muggles and 1 Auror. When the Department of Magical Accidents examined the wreckage, they discovered the stones had reverted mid-structure. The transfiguration had failed, or perhaps more chillingly, the stones had remembered their age. This idea that objects can remember is not as absurd as it seems. Magical items often carry enchantments that preserve their histories. The pensieve itself allows for memory to be stored in physical form. Wands grow loyal, mirrors retain truths. Would it be so far-fetched to believe a bridge might remember being old, broken, and neglected? In trying to trick time, Connell Twist may have awakened something ancient and unforgiving, the past refusing to be erased. Albus Dumbledore once remarked, "You cannot change the past, no matter how powerful you are." He said this about the Time Turner, after the tragic events involving Sirius Black and Buckbeak. But does the same principle not apply to transfiguration? When you turn back the clock on matter itself, is that not a form of rewriting history? Dumbledore knew more than he said, and there are whispers that even he hesitated to use transfiguration to its full potential, perhaps not out of caution but out of respect for time itself. In the Department of Mysteries, time is both studied and feared. The room of time houses clocks that melt, grow, reverse, and shatter. One tale tells of an unspeakable who attempted to use transfiguration inside that room, to turn an old teacup into a new one, just to see what would happen. The result? The teacup exploded violently, reversing to clay, then dust, then nothing. Time had no patience for interference. The room consumed the object like a flame devours parchment. Whatever spell he used did not fool the laws within those walls. Even Polyjuice Potion, while not transfiguration in the traditional sense, reveals the danger of transformation. Hermione's experience after taking cat hair by accident is a grim reminder that even temporary shifts have consequences. If her body partially forgot what it was and tried to become something it was never meant to be, then transfiguration must surely walk the same razor's edge. What if transforming something too far from its natural state fractures its timeline? What if the magic strains to maintain a lie the object can no longer sustain? Horace Slughorn once transfigured a sofa into a grand piano and back again with a flick of his wand. But that piano had not been crafted with wood, tuned with wire, or played over the years. It existed only in the moment, like a ghost, pretending to be real. Such an object might fool the eyes, but not time. Would it pass enchantment inspection? Would it produce sound like a true piano? Or would it fall silent under scrutiny, collapsing under the weight of unearned existence? Imagine a wizard reviving a wilted flower, not with herbology, but transfiguration, restoring its petals, its colour, its fragrance. Would that flower still attract bees? Would it produce seeds? Or would it be sterile like a painting of a flower rather than the real thing? Beauty without biology. A living death. This quiet horror runs beneath every instance of transfiguration. That what is changed may not be fully alive, or may be alive in the wrong way. Even the simplest transformations hint at this. When Ron Weasley attempted to transfigure a beetle into a button, it twitched, half insect, half object. The magic had failed not just technically, but morally. Something in the world rejected the change. This rejection, subtle and often ignored, may be the universe's way of resisting time violations. Not everything wants to be transformed, and not everything survives the lie of newness. Wizards seldom ask whether their spellwork creates or conceals. If a castle wall is transfigured to erase cracks, what lies beneath? Can that wall withstand a siege? Or will it crumble because the magic only masked the damage? As in the case of Connell Twist's bridge, the past often bleeds through. Transfiguration in this sense may be more of a bandage than a cure, a fragile illusion stretched over ancient bones. And then there's the matter of magical trace. Every spell leaves behind a residue, a shimmer, a scent, a whisper. But age, too, is part of magical identity. The sorting hat, for instance, is ancient, and part of its power comes from that age. If someone attempted to transfigure it into a new hat, its wisdom might be erased. A young hat cannot remember 1,000 students. Age is not merely wear, it is history, weight, memory. Remove it, and you mutilate more than cloth and stitches. The goblins, meticulous as they are, have long argued that true value cannot be conjured, only mined, forged, aged, and used. Their hostility toward transfiguration as a tool of commerce is well known. They believe that every item has a soul, and to scrub that soul clean through magical renewal is sacrilege. When a goblin polishes a blade, he respects the nicks and scars, the timeline of the weapon. A wizard, however, might simply wave his wand and make it shine as if it had never drawn blood. The Room of Requirement is an interesting exception. It transfigures itself constantly, yet it is not a product of human will. It responds to need, not desire, and even in its transformations it preserves memory. Dumbledore's army trained in a room full of magical dummies and cushions, but the room itself always knew what it had been. This suggests that when magic transforms with purpose rather than manipulation, time may allow it, or at least tolerate it. But personal gain? That crosses a line. Perhaps the question is not whether transfiguration can reverse time, but whether it should. Just as necromancy is taboo, not only for its danger, but for its audacity, perhaps advanced transfiguration crosses into the same moral territory. When we strip an object of its history, we deny its reality. We play gods with wand and word. And for what? A newer chair? A shinier coin? How many bridges must collapse before we question the cost? Even memories can be transfigured, not just altered in the mind, but reshaped in the world. A photograph aged and cracked by sorrow might be renewed, but then it no longer holds its place in the family home as a relic of time. It becomes decoration, not remembrance. The same applies to heirlooms, monuments, even tombstones. When you transfigure away age, you transfigure away grief, joy, struggle, all the fingerprints of time. And then what are we left with? It is tempting to see magic as infinite, a tool of convenience, a brush to repaint reality. But if transfiguration becomes a substitute for history, we risk losing more than we gain. Wizards must ask themselves not only what their spells can do, but what their spells undo. If the past is a river, then transfiguration may be a dam built on illusions. And eventually illusions break. Number 22, what happens if you transfigure a person into another person? Of all the disciplines taught at Hogwarts, Transfiguration remains one of the most precise and dangerous. It is not simply the art of changing one thing into another, it is the manipulation of the very essence of being. Professor McGonagall warned her students repeatedly that Transfiguration is not to be taken lightly, and her severe gaze behind square spectacles ensured they didn't forget. But the real danger, perhaps, lies not in turning teacups into tortoises or hedgehogs into pincushions. It lies in a question so rarely asked that it lurks on the edge of magical ethics like a predator in the dark. What would happen if a wizard transfigured one person into another? Not into an animal, not into an object, but into a perfect copy of a fellow human being. Consider Harry Potter, for instance. He sits in the Gryffindor common room across from Ron Weasley. They're of similar height, similar age. What if, with a flick of a wand, Harry could be made to look, sound, and even move exactly like Ron? Not by polyjuice potion, whose limitations are well documented, but by pure transfiguration. The idea is grotesque in its implications. If a matchbox can become a mouse and retain all mouse-like behavior until the spell wears off, why couldn't a boy become another boy entirely? Professor McGonagall never spoke of it openly, but her silence on the matter only heightens the discomfort. The laws of magic are governed by intention, skill, and limits set long ago, but if those limits are bent, perhaps by a particularly talented student or a malevolent adult wizard, the results could be catastrophic. One might argue that such a transformation is purely physical, just a surface illusion, yet transfiguration is not illusion. It changes bones, flesh, weight, height, even the texture of skin. When McGonagall turned herself into a cat, she didn't merely look like a feline. She became one in every sense, down to the twitch of her whiskers and the beat of her heart. Suppose someone transfigured Harry into Ron. Would Harry's voice change? Almost certainly. In Transfiguration, the voice adapts to the new form, much like when an animagus transforms. When Sirius Black becomes Padfoot, his vocal cords vanish entirely, replaced by the growl of a dog. So if Harry's body morphs into Ron's, his voice would match Ron's too, deeper, with that slight drawl unique to the Weasley clan. The implication is terrifying. A duplicate with an identical voice could mimic speech so convincingly that even Molly Weasley might not suspect the deception. Fingerprint magic is rarely discussed in wizarding texts, but we know from the careful design of Gringotts that goblins place immense trust in identity verification. If a transfigured wizard can fool even goblin enchantments, then security in the magical world becomes a farce. Imagine the havoc if Harry, transfigured into Ron, walks into Gringotts and empties Ron's vault. Who would suspect? Even Dumbledore's keen eyes might fail to detect the fraud if no polyjuice traces are present, because unlike potions, transfiguration leaves no residue. Yet what about magical abilities? Could Harry, made to resemble Ron, suddenly become worse at flying or better at wizard's chess? It seems unlikely. Magical skill in the Harry Potter universe is partly rooted in the wand, but also in a wizard's mind and soul. When Hermione Granger casts a spell, it succeeds because of her discipline, intellect, and deep understanding of incantations. If someone took her shape, they wouldn't inherit her mind. A Ron-shaped Harry would still be Harry inside. He'd hold his wand wrong when trying to stir a potion, or hesitate when casting Expelliarmus. Physical mimicry wouldn't make him Ron in spirit, in habit, or in knowledge. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." In the context of Transfiguration, that quote gains chilling new layers. Even if Harry becomes Ron in appearance, his choices would betray him. He might walk differently, forget inside jokes, or flinch at spiders. Still, for a time, he could pass undetected. In a world where Death Eaters already manipulate appearances, using polyjuice, glamours, and masks, transfiguration as identity theft could be the next evolution of magical crime. The question grows darker when one imagines coercion. If someone were to capture a witch, say Luna Lovegood, and transfigure her into Bellatrix Lestrange, what would that mean? Could the Order of the Phoenix unwittingly kill her, thinking her a Death Eater? It evokes memories of Barty Crouch Jr. and his year-long impersonation of Mad-Eye Moody. He relied on polyjuice, yes, but transfiguration would have left no potion trail, no suspicious flasks hidden in trunks. His deception could have been even more perfect and more permanent. The permanence is another dilemma. While polyjuice wears off, transfiguration can be made semi-permanent with enough magical force. McGonagall's transformations, though reversible, were precise and required mastery. What if someone used a blood ritual or ancient runes to lock in a transformation? Would the wizard ever be able to revert? Would they remember who they were? Wizards like Gilderoy Lockhart have lost their memories permanently. What happens if memory is lost while in another body? One might think such a thing impossible under wizarding law. But the law has gaps. The Ministry of Magic controls apparition, portkeys, time travel, and magical creatures, but who enforces ethical boundaries in transfiguration? The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. A transfigured human, mistaken for a criminal, could be arrested, tried, and even sentenced, all while screaming the truth in another's voice. The system is not equipped to handle such deception. In a hypothetical scenario, imagine Draco Malfoy transfigures Crabbe into Harry and sends him to Dumbledore's office. The headmaster, recognizing only the scar and glasses, might divulge critical secrets. If transfiguration fools not just eyes but magical wards keyed to identity, then the entire concept of personal security collapses. A blood ward protecting the burrow could open to a transfigured Ginny, while inside lurked a disguised enemy. Even Hogwarts, the safest place in the magical world, could fall prey to such infiltration. If a student could transfigure themselves into a professor, classes could be sabotaged, grades falsified, students manipulated. The Forbidden Forest could become a haven for shape thieves, and with young minds experimenting in secret, Fred and George already mastered advanced charms by third year. Who's to say a gifted Ravenclaw wouldn't attempt this very feat? That may be why McGonagall guards her classroom with such intensity. She doesn't merely fear mistakes, she fears misuse. A wrongly cast spell might turn a student into a lump of flesh, yes, but a deliberately cast one could plunge society into paranoia. Wizards would carry documents everywhere, verification charms humming constantly, trust in friends evaporating overnight. In such a world, the Marauder's map might become the only reliable tool for proving identity. Yet even that map was fooled by Peter Pettigrew, who spent years as scabbers under the nose of a generation. It is worth noting that even Voldemort never used transfiguration for impersonation. Perhaps he found it unreliable, or perhaps even he feared the consequences of tampering with human identity at that level. If the Dark Lord refrained from it, the implications are serious. Either the spell is unpredictable, or its moral cost is too high, even for him. A duplicate might suffer. A human mind trapped in a shell, not its own, might lose clarity, develop madness, or collapse entirely. In the Department of Mysteries, the unspeakables study time, death, thought, and love. But among their secret chambers may lie a room dedicated to identity, where ancient transfiguration scrolls describe forbidden experiments, wizards changing faces, stealing voices, inserting themselves into other families. Perhaps that's why the statute of secrecy remains rigid. If Muggles discovered that even their fingerprints, their voices, their DNA could be replicated, the panic would ripple through both worlds. There is a reason that animagi are registered. The Ministry fears deception, but transfiguration, if turned inward and weaponized, is a far greater threat. A skilled transfiguration artist could mimic a world leader, sign laws, declare war. They could become Dumbledore for a single hour and destroy everything he built. Magic has no natural morality. Only its users decide how dark the spells become. And transfiguration, in the wrong hands, is the darkest of all. The real question is, how close did anyone ever come to doing it? Were there tales in the restricted section about students who tried? Perhaps in Tom Riddle's time, a brilliant Slytherin once attempted to become a professor, seduce power, or rob Gringotts using someone else's form. Perhaps it failed. Horribly? Perhaps that's why the books on human-to-human transfiguration are locked behind enchantments. When McGonagall tells her class, transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. She speaks with an edge of steel. Because she knows. Somewhere in her long years of study, she saw what happens when someone crosses the line. Maybe a friend, maybe a student, maybe herself, once, long ago. And so she teaches the rules not just as an educator, but as a warning. Magic always tempts. The idea of becoming someone else, of escaping one's own past, or committing crimes in another's name, is seductive. But the soul remembers, even in the body of another, a wizard's wand responds to his true self. Just as Harry's wand refused to perform for Draco even in disguise, the core of a wizard resists falsehood. And maybe that is our last protection, the wand's loyalty to the person within, not the skin without. So the next time someone says, "Couldn't we just transfigure someone into someone else?" they should pause. Magic can answer yes, but morality must scream no. Because in that moment, identity itself becomes a lie, and the wizarding world inches closer to chaos. The line between self and other blurs, and in that blur, trust dies. Number 23, can transfiguration influence destiny? Transfiguration, that ancient and exacting art, is one of the oldest branches of magic taught at Hogwarts. Yet few ever stop to ask a truly uncomfortable question: can transfiguration change fate itself? It is one thing to turn a beetle into a button or a pincushion into a hedgehog. It is something else entirely to alter the course of a human life through shape-shifting magic so profound it bends not just bodies but destinies. When a witch is transfigured into a teacup for a decade, when a wizard spends years as an animal or an object, does their life, their fate, their soul remain intact? Or does it fracture and reform into something entirely different? Consider the case of Professor McGonagall's strict emphasis on control in her classroom. She taught transfiguration with more rigor than any other subject, her stern face always alert for the smallest error. Her famous warning still echoes through the corridors. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Why so dangerous? Why not simply complicated or powerful? Because beneath the shifting shapes lies a deeper terror, the potential to sever someone from their path, to reroute their very being through the deceptive power of magical form. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Ron accidentally turns his pet rat Scabbers into something only half recognizable. But Scabbers, of course, was not a rat at all, but Peter Pettigrew. The consequences of that identity being hidden through Animaga's transfiguration affected not just one life, but many. 13 years as a rat did more than hide Pettigrew from justice. It kept Sirius Black imprisoned, delayed Voldemort's return, and plunged Remus Lupin into bitter isolation. That single transformation of form restructured the fates of everyone connected to the Marauders. Pettigrew did not just wear a rat's body, he became his disguise, his soul diminished, his courage withered. Transfiguration had rewritten his essence. The story of Rita Skeeter offers another chilling reflection. She illegally transformed herself into a beetle to spy and gather information, embedding herself into windowsills and brooches. But Hermione captured her and kept her in a jar, locked in her beetle form for weeks. Imagine that, a fully sentient woman forced to live in an insect's body, unable to speak, write, or move freely. Was her punishment just? Perhaps. But more haunting is the thought of what this did to Rita's destiny. She was not imprisoned with bars and chains, but with magic that erased her agency. When she emerged again, her articles were more restrained, her power broken. That jar had changed her, not just in body but in fate. And what of Bertha Jorkins, a witch whose memory was shattered by a curse? She was later transfigured, tortured, and murdered by Lord Voldemort. But before her death, she was said to be altered, no longer whole, not just mentally, but magically. Transfiguration in dark hands becomes an instrument of fate's mutilation. Voldemort, ever seeking to twist destiny, found in Transfiguration a way to dissolve the will of others. He reshaped Bertha as he would reshape the world. Her story vanished into the shadows, a woman's life swallowed by a single moment of magical manipulation. Transfiguration is not, as many assume, simply a parlor trick or academic puzzle. It is a force of irreversible potential. The very fact that certain transformations, such as human-to-object transfigurations, require ministry clearance or are even forbidden outright, suggests that the magical community fears something far deeper than botched spells. They fear the existential consequences of meddling with what should remain fixed: the soul, the path, the journey. Can a person turned into a chair for a decade return to their life unchanged? Can they love the same, think the same, dream the same? And if not, has their fate been broken? In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor McGonagall speaks of animagi with reverence and alarm. Becoming an animal voluntarily is one thing. Being transfigured into one by another is quite different. Even the animagus transformation, though reversible, alters perception. Sirius Black as Padfoot saw the world through a dog's senses for years. When he emerged, he was not quite the man he had been. He was more feral, more instinct-driven, his laughter darker, his emotions wilder. The prison of Azkaban had broken his spirit, yes, but the years in canine form had reshaped his nature. Is that not fate transformed by magic? Prophecy looms large in the wizarding world. From the Hall of Prophecies to the fated confrontation between Harry and Voldemort, the concept of a predetermined path haunts many lives. But Transfiguration introduces chaos into the equation. If fate is real and paths are written, what happens when magic forcibly interrupts that path? When a witch is transfigured into a painting or a wizard is trapped in a glass orb, does the prophecy adjust or does it die? What if fate is not so much a line but a pattern, easily disrupted by a skilled enough hand? The Department of Mysteries guards certain truths not because they are forbidden, but because they are terrifying. In one hidden wing, it is rumored that the unspeakables study the effect of advanced transfiguration on memory, identity, and fate. These are not transformations of body, but of selfhood. What happens when a person is made to believe they are something else, not by Imperius, but by form itself? A woman who has spent 10 years as a wolf may forget what it is to speak, to hope, to trust. A man who has been a silver candelabrum may remember fire, but not love. In changing the form, you may also change the soul. And the soul in the magical world is not something easily mended. Horcruxes show that splitting the soul is dark, near irreversible, but transfiguration, if used carelessly, may twist the soul rather than break it. A person transformed repeatedly may begin to lose cohesion. Identity fractures, memory slips. Dumbledore, with his deep knowledge of the arcane, avoided human transfiguration even in his most desperate moments. Why? Because even he feared the consequences of twisting destiny by force. There is a forgotten name in the Hogwarts registry, Eleanora Vane. A brilliant student in the 1800s, she sought to understand the boundaries of transfiguration. In a dangerous experiment, she transfigured herself into a statue, intending to observe the world for 100 years and then return. But she did not anticipate the stillness of stone, the silence of time. When she was finally discovered and restored in 1990, she was no longer Eleanora. Her speech was strange. Her mind fogged. Her future had been stolen. The centuries she missed held her love, her family, her place in the world. Transfiguration had robbed her of her fate. Even in ordinary classroom spells there is risk. When Neville Longbottom accidentally turned his ears into flapping leaves in his first year, it was humorous. But imagine if the spell had lasted. Imagine if he had lived with it for a year, a decade. Would he have become the same brave Gryffindor who pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat? Or would shame and isolation have made him a different man, timid, hidden, bitter? Fate is not a straight road, it is shaped by every moment, and Transfiguration has the power to detour lives entirely. The strict regulation of this field is no accident. The Ministry of Magic permits students to learn Transfiguration in controlled environments, but imposes strict penalties for unauthorized use. Because this is magic that changes not just matter, but meaning. It reassigns roles, it erases time. It is perhaps the closest thing to rewriting destiny. And with that power comes the temptation to play God. Who decides who is turned into a matchstick? Who restores them? Who judges what is temporary and what is fate? In ancient magical societies, transfiguration was considered sacred. The Druids believed that changing form altered your place in the cosmic cycle. Some wizards in Old Tibet used transformation to shed karma, but others feared it as a disruption of divine law. They believed each soul was born into a shape for a reason. To alter that shape was to insult the wisdom of the universe. In these cultures, accidental transformations were seen as curses, not curiosities. Perhaps they were right. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are." But what if choice is removed? What if a person is transfigured and held that way as punishment or protection for so long that they forget their choices? What then reveals their true self? Is their fate still their own? Or does it belong to the wand that reshaped them? These questions echo through every spell cast in the Transfiguration classroom, and few dare to answer them. There is a story that in the First Wizarding War, a rebel group used Transfiguration to escape capture. One transfigured himself into a tree for 5 years. When he was found, his eyes were wild, his speech slurred. He could no longer remember who he was hiding from or why. The war had ended, his cause forgotten, his sacrifice unmarked. In changing himself to survive, he had erased the life he meant to save, and perhaps the fate he was meant to fulfill. Some argue that magic cannot touch the soul, only the body. But in practice, the two are inseparable. A body that cannot feel, move, or speak slowly silences the soul within. A bird can forget it was once a man. A spoon can forget desire. If Transfiguration can do this, can it not also redirect destiny itself? Can it not steal futures, delay fates, or create alternate paths that never should have existed? The great tragedy of Transfiguration lies not in its failures, but in its successes. The spell that perfectly transforms a man into a clock may never allow him to feel time again. The child turned into a rabbit as punishment may grow to fear her reflection. The wizard who escapes through shape-shifting may never find his way back to the self he left behind. Magic, for all its marvels, has consequences, and none are more haunting than those which change not what we are, but who we were meant to become. In the end, perhaps that is why McGonagall taught her subject with such solemnity. She knew that Transfiguration is not about tricks or showmanship, it is about identity, about the invisible thread that ties us to our past and future. And when that thread is snapped, even with the cleanest incantation, it may never fully mend. Fate, once bent, may not straighten again. Number 24. What happens to the reproductive function of transfigured creatures? In the dim corridors of Hogwarts, where torches flicker and portraits whisper among themselves, few students consider the true implications of the spells they cast. Transfiguration is one of the most dazzling disciplines taught at the school, a branch of magic that allows the transformation of one object or being into another. Under Professor McGonagall's stern instruction, students routinely turn beetles into buttons and teacups into tortoises. But behind the marvel lies a question so uncomfortable, so quietly unsettling, that it is rarely asked aloud. What happens to the reproductive system of a creature that has been transfigured? If a cat is turned into a rabbit and then placed in the company of another transfigured rabbit, will their instincts compel them to mate? And if they do, what will be born of that union? If anything at all. In her 5th year, Hermione Granger once posed a version of this question to Professor McGonagall after class, though the professor gave her a quick, dismissive answer about temporary transfigurations having no bearing on generational inheritance. But the doubt lingered. For Hermione, known for her obsessive pursuit of magical logic, the idea that form could change without altering function seemed dangerously inconsistent. She knew from their studies that some transfigurations, like those performed in animagus transformations, were so complete they included the physical senses, ears that could hear better, paws that could run faster. Yet the rules of reproduction seemed entirely absent from every textbook she scoured. Consider a hypothetical case: 2 ordinary cats, Poppy and Thistle, transformed by an adept wizard into hares. They are not merely illusions. Their bodies are covered in thick, brown fur. They twitch their noses, hop with strength in their hind legs, and possess all external characteristics of true leporids. The wizard, curious and a bit reckless, leaves them in a warren with natural hares. Weeks pass. Behavior becomes indistinguishable. Eventually, Poppy and Thistle mate with each other, and signs of pregnancy appear. But what emerges, if anything, could dismantle fundamental assumptions of transfiguration. Would she give birth to kittens, to kits, or to nothing at all? There's reason to believe the answer is not so straightforward. In Theories of Transubstantial Transfiguration, a dusty tome from the Hogwarts Library's restricted section, author Emmerich Switch muses briefly, "The reshaping of form does not presume the rewriting of essence." In other words, turning a cat into a rabbit might give it the ears and speed of a rabbit, but not the chromosomes, not the ova or sperm required for true reproduction. A transfigured creature might still carry within it the unaltered DNA of its origin species, beautifully hidden beneath a perfect exterior, but unable to pass on a lie to the next generation. But if this is true, why are some transformations so utterly convincing? When Peter Pettigrew lived as Scabbers the Rat for years, no one doubted his authenticity. He ate like a rat, moved like a rat, and even evaded magical detection. Yet there is no record of him reproducing, no baby rats born from Scabbers in the Weasley household. Could it be that nature, even when masked by magic, resists being tricked entirely? The ethical implications of this are staggering. Suppose a wizard with commercial ambitions decides to transform a flock of chickens into a rare breed of goose to sell golden eggs. If he finds himself with sterile animals, unable to breed or produce future generations, his plan crumbles, not because of a flaw in business, but because of a limitation in magic. Transfiguration might be a veil, not a rewriting of the script. The wizard is not playing God, only a very skilled costumer. And what of the darker uses? During the First Wizarding War, there were rumours, quiet and quickly silenced, that certain Death Eaters experimented with transforming Muggle-borns into animals for cruel sport. If a human girl was transfigured into a swan and left in the wild, and if she mated with a real swan, what horror might result? A malformed hybrid? A stillbirth? Or simply nothing? Would magic allow such a union to be consummated, or would biology shut it down at the first impossibility? The case of Miranda Goshawk, the famed author of the Standard Book of Spells, is often cited among Transfiguration scholars for a lesser-known experiment she performed in her youth. She once transformed a ferret into a dormouse and kept it in a cage with real dormice for an entire winter. It mated, nested, and built tunnels. But when spring came and the other dormice gave birth, the ferret-turned-dormouse remained barren. It was a quiet failure, unrecorded in her published works, but noted in private correspondences held in the ministry archives. It was, she admitted, as if magic fooled the world but not the womb. Even Dumbledore, for all his openness, never spoke in detail about the limits of transfiguration. He performed transformations so radical that they bordered on miraculous, and yet he never advocated for permanent biological replacements. When he turned a table into a pig during Harry's first year, it snorted and moved convincingly, but there was no mention of it breeding or living beyond the lesson. Was that a limitation of spell duration, or a silent recognition that the spell did not create true life, only a mask over it? When Victor Crumb partially transfigured into a shark during the Triwizard Tournament, he retained his human consciousness. His body was functional enough to swim, hunt, and rescue, but what if he had remained in that state for weeks? Could he have digested food as a shark? Could he have mated with marine life? The books never answer, yet the silence is telling. It suggests that transfiguration, for all its brilliance, dances only on the surface of nature's laws. It becomes even more complicated with permanent transfigurations. Professor McGonagall, an animagus, could become a cat at will, but her transformation, though visually perfect, did not extend her lifespan, nor did she ever suggest that she had borne kittens. Animagi remain fundamentally human, even in animal shape. So the reverse must also be true. An animal made to look human does not become one. The form is borrowed, but the soul is not exchanged. A more tragic case exists in the archives of St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. A young witch named Isadora Blackwell once attempted to transfigure her dying dog into a human child, desperate to save its life and keep its memory alive. She succeeded in creating a form, small, warm, even capable of speech. But the child thing was barren, mute in emotion, and slowly deteriorated. Within months, it collapsed in her arms, reverting to lifeless fur. She was institutionalized, her mind broken not by grief, but by the realization that she had only created an echo, not a legacy. This brings us to the heart of the question. Can magic touch the seed of life? It can make illusions real, alter appearances and deceive senses, but can it rewrite DNA, reprogram cells, create gametes that carry traits and pass them on? If it could, surely the wizarding world would be full of hybrid animals, magical chimera, and breedings that defy nature. Yet we see no talking deer born of humans, no griffins born of lions and eagles made by spell. Magical creatures are bred, not made. Even Hagrid's blast-ended scroots were the result of unnatural mating, not transfiguration. The boundaries are deliberate. Magic resists full biological control. Perhaps it is the work of deeper laws, what Dumbledore once called the old magic. Reproduction, it seems, belongs to a domain older than spells, older even than wands. It is tied to essence, not form. The Patronus, after all, is not about shape, but soul. So it is with life. Magic may borrow the body, but not the bloodline. If this is true, then a transformed animal is forever a visitor in its borrowed skin. It cannot pass on what it does not truly possess. Like a ghost mimicking the living, it walks, breathes, and acts, but it leaves no legacy. It is a silent performance, powerful and tragic. And if this principle holds, then magical ethics must reconsider the casual use of transfiguration. A farm filled with transfigured animals may produce milk or eggs, but it will never produce life. Wizards who seek to circumvent nature for convenience might discover that magic has its own quiet rules, unchangeable, unspoken, and binding. In the final analysis, transfiguration reveals itself not as true creation, but as a mirror. It reflects back a reality so detailed that even the beholder believes it. But beneath that mirror lies an unyielding truth. Nature is not so easily rewritten. You may paint over the canvas, but the original remains untouched and waiting. Number 25. Can you transfigure memories into physical objects? Albus Dumbledore once remarked that the mind is a complex and many-layered thing, and nothing proves this better than the magical study of memories. In the wizarding world, memories can be extracted, stored and viewed again like scenes on a reel. We see this through the pensieve, a deep silver basin that holds recollections in liquid form. Dumbledore himself used it to store the memories of Horace Slughorn and Bob Ogden, and Harry Potter used it to walk through Snape's childhood as if stepping into time itself. But the mechanics of these memories have always been somewhat ethereal. They float, swirl, and respond to magic. What if, however, the magic of memory didn't end at storage or viewing? What if it could be transformed into something solid, into a ring, a quill, or even a necklace? Could a memory become not just a story to observe, but an object to touch, to wear, to carry? Transfiguration is one of the most advanced and dangerous branches of magic. Professor McGonagall often warned students that true transfiguration demanded focus, control, and an iron grasp of intention. Transforming a hedgehog into a pincushion is challenging enough, but what about something immaterial? A memory is neither creature nor object, but a string of thought suspended in magic. Yet in the Department of Mysteries, we see that time and thought are not immune to manipulation. In the Hall of Prophecy, orbs contain visions and knowledge. Memories stored in vials behave in similar ways. They can be poured, passed along, and reabsorbed. If they can already be made semi-physical, could they be taken a step further? Imagine a moment from someone's life, perhaps a child's first step, a whispered confession, or a dying man's last words, being pulled from the mind and reformed as a locket. The memory would live in the metal, carved into its magical makeup. A mother might give her child a pendant containing the day of their birth, and each time the pendant was worn, a warmth or vision might rise to the surface. Not a full dive like the pensieve offers, but a whisper, a scent, a flicker behind the eyes. The idea is poetic, but is it possible? Would it remain merely symbolic, or could it literally hold the experience? This concept is not entirely alien in wizarding tradition. The Diary of Tom Riddle is a cautionary tale of memory given unnatural life. Though technically a Horcrux, the diary was more than a soul fragment. It was also a memory, preserved and sentient. It interacted, adapted, and preyed upon Ginny Weasley's mind. "He poured a bit of his soul into me," Ginny confessed after being rescued. But this Horcrux behaved like a memory transfigured into parchment and ink. It remembered, retold, and relived. It was a book that wore a life. Consider also the mirror of Erised. It shows not the truth, but the deepest desires of the heart. Yet what it reveals are often tangled with memory, the remembered voice of a lost parent, the longing for a life that could have been. Could such longing be given shape? If magic allows us to view memories outside of our minds, the idea of shaping them into matter doesn't seem far-fetched. Magic in Rowling's world is a matter of will and understanding. If the intention is clear enough, if the spell is deep enough, perhaps a memory can become more than mist. One might think of wand cores. Phoenix feather, dragon heartstring, unicorn hair, each is taken from a living being infused with natural magic. But what if one day wand makers began using memories? A strand of memory locked inside the core could shape the wand's character. A wand that remembers bravery or betrayal might respond differently in the hands of different wizards. Memory could become a new element in magical craftsmanship. Imagine a wand that remembers a war or a kiss or the scream of a dying friend. But the darker implications are far more chilling. If a memory can be transfigured into a physical item, then it can also be stolen. A skilled legilimens might extract a memory from a sleeping victim, transfigure it into a brooch, and sell it on Nocturne Alley. A brooch of someone's greatest shame, a ring forged from a murder, a book that contains a betrayal whispered in the dark. And if the owner of that memory never retrieves it, would they remain hollow, damaged? Would they forget the truth or live forever haunted by an absence they can't name? Dumbledore once told Harry, It is our choices that show what we truly are. But if memories are choices crystallized in time, then turning them into objects becomes a way to reshape not just the past, but identity. A young witch, ashamed of her father's cowardice in the First Wizarding War, might transfigure the memory and cast it away. In doing so, she might forget him entirely. Would that free her or doom her? Could she live in peace, or would the memory claw its way back through nightmares? The act of destroying such a memory object also invites ethical horror. If the ring is shattered, does the memory vanish? Would that part of the person, the pain, the joy, the love, die with it? Memories define the self. Altering them, as Gilderoy Lockhart did, causes catastrophic damage. He tried to do a memory charm, Ron said, and it backfired. Lockhart lost himself. Now imagine erasing someone else, one memory at a time, by breaking the items they once wore or treasured. It is said that a powerful witch named Elspeth Greengrass once wore a chain of charms, each one bearing a different hue, a different glow. She claimed they were the memories of her ancestors. She never took them off. When she died, the chain vanished, leaving only whispers that it had absorbed too much. Was it transfiguration or just delusion? No one could say. But the idea lingers, jewelry that remembers. In the Forbidden Forest, centaurs speak of stars and fate. One centaur once murmured that the past echoes through trees. What if some trees carry the memories of those who touched them? Could a branch be carved into a keepsake and imbued with the memories of a dying soldier? Could a tree remember sorrow? In wand lore, Gregorovitch believed that wands developed personalities. Perhaps memory lies deeper in wood than we thought. There's also the curious case of the enchanted music box in the Black family's collection. When opened, it filled listeners with an inexplicable drowsiness. What if that box didn't just cast a spell, but recalled a memory? A lullaby, perhaps, sung long ago to a grieving child. Was it infused with a single moment of comfort? Was that memory carved into the melody like a spell into parchment? Some unspeakables have long speculated that thoughts and emotions can imprint onto matter. Love, hate, fear, these things leave traces. In Grimmauld Place, a locket caused unease even before it was revealed to be a Horcrux. "It's the locket," Ron said. "It affects us." But what if that effect wasn't just Voldemort's soul, but the memory of the pain he felt when he made it? A frozen scream, looping forever in silver. Would Hogwarts teach such magic? Certainly not. Professor McGonagall would consider it too dangerous. Transfiguration is not to be tampered with lightly, she once said, but in hidden corners of Durmstrang, or in lost manuscripts of ancient Mesopotamian mages, perhaps the spells exist, runes that take memory and bind it to form, charms that seal thought into metal. What if Grindelwald tried such spells before Dumbledore stopped him? Even the Marauder's map feels like a form of memory-turned-tool. "I solemnly swear I'm up to no good," Harry whispered, and names appeared. Footsteps walked. Secrets revealed themselves. The creators, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, built it with more than enchantment. Perhaps they poured memories into its parchment, the rhythm of steps, the secrets of tunnels, the feeling of a castle explored after curfew. Then there is Snape. His final act was to give Harry memories, fragments of truth held in tears, not objects, but nearly so. Could he have transformed them into a pendant? Would Harry have worn his story around his neck rather than pouring it into a basin? And if he had, would he have felt the pain and love every time it touched his skin? In the end, perhaps the question is not can we, but should we? Memory is sacred. To shape it, to wear it, to destroy it. This is a power greater than most wizards are ready for, but power has never waited for readiness. Somewhere, someone is already trying, and somewhere else, someone has already forgotten who they once were, because a necklace was shattered and a story was lost. Number 26. Why isn't transfiguration used to cover up crimes? The world of magic, for all its wonders, often dances dangerously close to the edge of horror. Among the many sinister corners of wizarding history, disappearances, murders, secret duels under moonlight, one particular mystery remains oddly untouched. Why is transfiguration, the art of changing one object into another, not used more frequently to conceal dark deeds? Given the simplicity with which a teacup can be turned into a tortoise and a quill into a bouquet of flowers, the idea that a body could be transformed into a candle, a pile of socks, or a decorative vase seems disturbingly plausible. And yet there are no records of such atrocities, or at least none openly discussed. Transfiguration, as taught at Hogwarts, is a precise intellectual branch of magic. Minerva McGonagall, one of its greatest living masters, was known for her stern control and her unforgiving standards. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she once told her first-year class. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. The warning wasn't just about safety, it was about respect for power. Yet that same power, in the hands of someone darker than Professor McGonagall, could become a devastating weapon. A wand flick, a muttered incantation, and the evidence of a crime might vanish forever. In the years of Voldemort's rise, the wizarding world was plunged into an age of shadows. Entire families disappeared without a trace. Some were likely taken to the dungeons of Malfoy Manor or buried in forgotten fields under cover of night. But what if some were never buried at all? What if their bones never decayed because they had been changed into stone garden gnomes in Nocturne Alley, into paperweights on the desks of unsuspecting ministry officials, into worn boots at the back of a Death Eater's closet? One chilling rumour surrounds the death of Gideon Pruett, one of the bravest members of the original Order of the Phoenix. Official records say he died in battle alongside his brother Fabian, fighting off 5 Death Eaters. But there are whispers in oral files that the bodies recovered were not whole, that traces of residual magic clung to the remains, as though something had been undone. And there lies a possibility too dark to publish in the Prophet. What if only part of their bodies had ever been found? What if the rest had been changed, repurposed, tucked away by someone with mastery over form and matter? But magic, even at its most powerful, is rarely without trace. Alastair Moody once insisted that every spell leaves a signature, and he wasn't merely speaking metaphorically. In his years as an aura, Moody developed a keen eye for magical residue, particles of charm work, the shimmer of enchantments on objects, the odd lingering scent of burnt sage or ash, where spells were cast in haste. While transfiguration might change the physical shape of something, it may not mask the magical fingerprint it carries. It's possible that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has entire divisions, secret, highly trained operatives, who specialize in reversing transfigurations, in detecting that a rock is not merely a rock, but a silence-shrouded testimony to a crime long buried. And yet, there's an even more disturbing implication. Perhaps some transfigurations are never reversed. Perhaps some are irreversible. In A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, Emmerich Switch warns students, permanent transfigurations are dangerous and discouraged. Living matter transfigured into non-living matter often results in unstable consequences. But what if a dark wizard perfected the art? What if a skilled practitioner like Antonin Dolohov, who had once sliced through opponents with invisible curses, also learned to transfigure a heart into glass, a brain into dust, a soul into silence? The story of Mary Briggs, a young witch from Somerset who vanished during the First War, haunts the restricted section of Hogwarts even now. Unsolved, unclaimed and unclosed, her case was briefly reopened in 2003 when a group of Ravenclaw students discovered a petrified rabbit during a Care of Magical Creatures field trip. The rabbit was oddly warm to the touch and shimmered faintly under moonlight. Tests revealed traces of human DNA. But without a known spell to reverse the change, it was quietly returned to the Department of Mysteries. And there it remains, sealed, unexamined, and whispered about by those who still believe that transfiguration can hide truths too terrifying to face. One reason. Transfiguration might not be common among criminals, could be its difficulty. Unlike the unforgivable curses which rely on intention and willpower, transfiguration demands precision, knowledge of both source and target, and a kind of magical finesse that few possess. A failed transfiguration can be disastrous, half-changed forms, screaming objects, unstable matter that defies physics and sanity. A hand turned into smoke might never return. A corpse turned into water might become cursed and infectious. The risk in many cases may outweigh the reward. Still, we must ask, has it truly never been used, or has it simply been used well? In Hogwarts, a history, a brief, almost unnoticeable footnote mentions a chamber sealed for 300 years, known only to the headmasters and protected by layers of detection spells. Some believe it houses evidence too volatile for Azkaban, items that were once people, memories trapped in objects, truths bound in unnatural form. If such a chamber exists, it proves the point. Someone, at some time, used transfiguration to commit a crime so perfectly executed that even the headmaster dared not destroy the evidence. Then there's the case of Thaddeus Morpepper, a potion master who disappeared under suspicion of having brewed illegal memory elixirs. The only clue found in his residence was a stuffed raven sitting atop a shelf. Ministry investigators noted the raven's feathers were laced with polyjuice residue and wand core shavings. The creature was incinerated during a later raid. Accidentally, it was claimed. But there are those who suspect that Thaddeus had not disappeared at all, only transformed, and that someone at the ministry wanted him gone for good. It's also worth noting that Hogwarts itself guards against misuse of transfiguration. The castle's enchantments, laid centuries ago, detect major bodily transmutations and alert the headmaster's office when a living creature is forcibly altered. Yet, outside of Hogwarts, no such protections exist. In the forests, in the alleyways, in the abandoned halls of Gringotts' lower levels, there are no sentient wards to scream when someone is turned into bone china or a music box. Dolores Umbridge once declared that magic must be controlled for the safety of the state. In her chilling reign over the ministry, she instituted mandatory wand inspections and surveillance of high-level spell work. Ironically, it was Umbridge's own ministry that allegedly lost control over an entire shipment of cursed tea sets, rumoured to have once been a band of goblin rebels, punished by transfiguration and sold to collectors. No charges were ever filed, no records remain, only a single sugar spoon in the possession of Xenophilius Lovegood, who claims it whispers in gobbledygook when stirred counterclockwise. Perhaps the answer is simpler. Perhaps the wizarding community prefers not to look. Just as Muggles create myths to cover their ignorance, phantoms, conspiracies, fairy tales, wizards create silence. An empty chair where someone once sat is easier to accept than a broken clock that might once have been a human being. Wizards, for all their power, fear irreversible spells. They fear what they cannot undo. In a world where time can be turned and death itself cheated for a moment, the finality of transfiguration used as a tool of murder is unthinkable. There's also the ethical shadow cast by such magic. The idea that a person can be changed permanently, completely, without consent, is perhaps the darkest crime imaginable. Worse even than the killing curse, which at least allows death. To transfigure a soul into matter is to deny it closure. It traps consciousness in form. The very concept of magical object sentience becomes suspect. Is that sword whispering because it's enchanted, or because it remembers being someone? In 1998, during the final battle at Hogwarts, a shattered suit of armor on the third floor began to speak. Screaming incoherently, it ran into battle before collapsing into rust. Some students believed it had been animated by the castle itself. Others thought it had once been a person. One theory suggests it was a member of the Carrow family punished by McGonagall in the final moments of the war. The truth remains unknown, but the event is recorded in a private log kept by Neville Longbottom, who still refuses to speak of it.